intracranial course and exit. Cranial nerves supplying the extraocular muscles have a fairly long intracranial course, whereas cranial nerves like the hypoglossal nerve has a short intracranial course. Olfactory nerve never leaves the cranial cavity. It stays on the cribriform plates in the anterior cranial fossa. The optic nerve leaves the cranial cavity through the optic canal. The oculomotor nerve, trochlear nerve, ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve and the abducent nerve leaves the cranial cavity through superior and inferior orbital fissures. The maxillary division of the trigeminal nerve leaves through foramen rotundum, and the mandibular division, the trigeminal nerve, leaves through foramen ovale. Facial nerve and the vestibulocochlear nerve leaves the cranial cavity by entering the internal acoustic meatus. It has a course inside the petrous temporal bone before finally exits through the stylomastoid foramen. 9, 10 and 11 cranial nerves leave through the jugular foramen, and finally the hypoglossal nerve leaves through the hypoglossal canal at the foramen magnum. We will take a look at the individual nerves and their pathways. The olfactory nerve, the first cranial nerve. The first order neurons of the olfactory nerve start from the olfactory mucosa and passes through the cribriform plate and synapse with the cell bodies of the second order neuron inside the olfactory bulb. The second order neuron nerve fibers form the olfactory nerve or the olfactory tract, which divides into two, and one enters the anterior perforated substance and the other fibers enter the uncus area. One thing that is important to remember about the olfactory pathway is that it, unlike all other sensory pathways, it bypasses the thalamus and enters the cortical areas directly. Optic nerve or the second cranial nerve. The brain has a contralateral representation of the body. This is the general rule. When it comes to vision, the visual fields are also represented contralaterally in the brain. If you take the whole visual field, you can divide it into a right visual field and a left visual field. The right visual field the information from the right visual field reaches the left side of the brain, and the information from the left visual field reaches the right side of the brain, going by the general rule of contralateral representation. In order to do that, if you divide the retina of the eye into two halves, nasal half and the temporal half, the information from for instance from the right visual field will fall on the temporal half of the left eyeball, the retina, and the nasal half of the right retina of the right eyeball. And this information from the left temporal half and the right nasal half will ultimately go onto the left side of the brain. So the nasal half fibers will have to cross each other to reach the opposite side of the brain. Here is the left optic nerve and here is the right optic nerve. the nasal fibers from the left and right retina cross and form what is called optic chiasma in relation to the pituitary stalk here. And the temporal fibers and the nasal fibers from the opposite eyes unite and form what is called optic tract. This is left optic tract and this is right optic tract. Fibers coming through the optic tract synapse at the lateral geniculate body or the lateral geniculate nucleus of the thalamus before it finally reaches the occipital lobe or the visual cortex surrounding the calcarine sulcus. The visual pathway has an extension for visual reflexes, which I will be discussing in detail in the next slide. Now we will go into a little bit more details about the pathway of the optic nerve. This is the left and right optic nerves. And optic chiasma here, and the left and right optic tracts. Now the nerve fibers coming through the optic tract on each side gets separated out and reach three destinations. Now, as I said before in the previous slide, one set of fibers synapse in the lateral geniculate body and they end up in the visual cortex, go through the optic radiation and end up in the visual cortex here. And then there's another set of fibers going towards the superior colliculus for bodily reflexes. Now, one example for bodily reflexes coming through the optic nerve is if you flash a torch suddenly on a cat, the cat will jump. So this is because of this fibers ending in the superior colliculus and giving rise to nerve tracts coming down into the muscles of the limbs and the trunk, so that the cat will reflexly jump when you flash a torch. Then the third group of fibers go to the pretectal nucleus, very closely related to the optic nucleus and the Edinger-Westphal nucleus at the superior colliculus area, and these fibers are responsible for pupillary light reflexes. In this specimen, you can see the inferior aspect of the cerebral hemispheres and the anterior aspect of the brain stem, and this is the area of the thalamus here. You can see the optic chiasma here. Optic nerves has been removed here. This is the optic chiasma area, and this is the optic tract area, the two optic tracts, and this is the lateral geniculate body, where the optic tract, some of the fibers in the optic tract synapse before they reach the visual cortex. Third cranial nerve, oculomotor nerve. The oculomotor nerve has two types of nuclei, the somatic motor nucleus and the visceral motor nucleus, or the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. It is also called accessory oculomotor nucleus. And both these nuclei lie at the level of the superior colliculus of the midbrain. And the optic nerve, after originating from its nuclei, emerge from the ventral aspect of the midbrain, and you can find this nerve, oculomotor nerve, between the posterior cerebral artery, this one, and the superior cerebellar artery. So this is a typical appearance in a specimen. To find the oculomotor nerve, you can actually look for the posterior cerebral and the superior cerebral arteries. You get the nerve between the two, and the trochlear nerve lies further laterally between the same two arteries. And then the optic nerve enters the cavernous sinus through its roof and is found in the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus. We will get back to it in a slide later. The oculomotor nerve supplies most of the extraocular muscles except the lateral rectus supplied by the abducent nerve, sixth cranial nerve, and the superior oblique muscle supplied by the fourth cranial nerve or the trochlear nerve. All the other extraocular muscles other than these two muscles are supplied by the oculomotor nerve. In this diagram, you can see a detailed pathway of the oculomotor nerve. You can see the two nuclei here, the somatic motor nucleus appearing in red color, and the parasympathetic or the visceral motor nucleus of the oculomotor nerve, which are lying at the superior colliculus level of the midbrain. The oculomotor nerve later, once it comes out from the cavernous sinus, divides into a superior division and an inferior division. And the parasympathetic fibers pass with the inferior division. Parasympathetic fibers pass with the inferior division. And the parasympathetic fibers, they form a ganglion formed by the cell bodies of the postganglionic neuron here in the orbit, and then the parasympathetic fibers will supply the ciliary muscles and the sphincter pupillae muscles. And the sphincter pupillae muscles are responsible for constriction of the pupil. Constriction of the pupil. Then other muscles, extraocular muscles, as I said before, are also supplied by these two divisions, the medial rectus, inferior rectus, and inferior oblique muscles. The superior division, on the other hand, it does not contain parasympathetic fibers. This one does not contain parasympathetic fibers, and it supplies the somatic motor component coming through the superior division will supply the superior rectus muscle, and then the levator palpebrae superioris muscle. Now this levator palpebrae superioris muscle is attached to the upper eyelid, and it is important to keep the eye open. If this muscle is paralyzed, there is ptosis, drooping of the upper eyelid. Then there is another point, even though it is not directly related to the oculomotor nerve, there is no sympathetic outflow from the brain. You get the sympathetic to the head and the face region from the cervical sympathetic chain coming through the internal carotid plexus. I'll get back to it later. So these sympathetic fibers also enter the orbit to supply the structures there. So it supplies the levator palpebrae superioris muscle and the dilator pupillae muscle. Now we said the constrictor pupillae muscle is supplied by the parasympathetic fibers and constricts the pupil, and the sympathetic fibers will supply the dilator pupillae muscle and dilates the pupil. And the other point is that we have already mentioned that the levator palpebrae superioris is also supplied by the somatic motor component coming through the superior division of the oculomotor nerve, and it is also supplied by the sympathetic fibers coming through it. So it also has got two supplies, sympathetic and somatic motor supply. Sympathetic nerves to the head and the face area is borrowed from the superior cervical ganglion in the neck, and the sympathetic nerve fibers jump onto the internal carotid artery from the superior cervical ganglion and passes through the internal carotid artery. and then gets distributed into the structures in the region of the head and the face. Few more points about the levator palpebrae superioris muscle. We have already said that the levator palpebrae superioris muscle is supplied by both sympathetic and somatic motor nerves. Somatic motor nerves coming through the oculomotor nerve, and the sympathetic nerves coming through the internal carotid artery from the superior cervical ganglion. If the sympathetic nerves are damaged, uh, because of the presence of the intact somatic component coming through the oculomotor nerve, there will be only partial ptosis, half ptosis. On the other hand, if the somatic component is damaged, which is coming through the oculomotor nerve, even though the sympathetic component is intact, you get full ptosis. This is an example for full ptosis and partial ptosis. In this lady, because of damage to the oculomotor nerve, there is the full ptosis. And here you get partial ptosis due to damage to the sympathetic component. Now this partial ptosis is found in Horner's syndrome, where you get damage to the superior cervical ganglion in the neck region. When there is intracranial hemorrhage, especially extradural hemorrhage in relation to the middle meningeal vessels, uh, uncal herniation can take place, and the oculomotor nerve is very closely related to the region of the uncus and the opening of the tentorium cerebelli. When the uncus herniates through the opening of the tentorium cerebelli, the oculomotor nerve, which is very closely related there, can get compressed between the uncus, the herniating uncus, and the edge of the tentorium cerebelli there. So this grooving has taken place because of the uncal herniation and the compression of the brain substance against the edge of the tentorium cerebelli. So the oculomotor nerve that is there, you can see the oculomotor nerve on the other side here, can get compressed between the free edge of the tentorium cerebelli and the herniating uncus. And then you can get signs of oculomotor nerve palsy, which are extraocular muscle paralysis and dilatation of the pupil, and even ptosis of the eye if it is severely paralyzed. Only one functional component is carried in the fourth cranial nerve or the trochlear nerve, which is the somatic motor component. And we have already said that the nucleus, the somatic motor nucleus of the trochlear nerve lies at the level of the inferior colliculus of the midbrain, and it emerges from the dorsal aspect of the brain. You can see it here, emerges from the dorsal aspect of the brain, and it crosses the midline and goes to the opposite side. On the inferior side like this, and then it also travels in the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus together with the oculomotor nerve, and this is the nerve that supplies the superior oblique muscle. Like the trochlear nerve, abducent nerve also carries one functional component, which is somatic motor component, and the somatic motor nucleus of the abducent nerve lies in relation to the facial colliculus, underneath the facial colliculus. It emerges between the pons and the pyramid of the medulla on the anterior aspect, and it also travels, it actually travels through the cavernous sinus, not on the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus, but through the cavernous sinus, together with the internal carotid artery and sympathetic plexus surrounding the internal carotid artery. And it is the nerve that supplies the lateral rectus of the extraocular muscles. This is where the abducent nerve emerges from the brain stem. You can see it here emerging between the pons here and the pyramid of the medulla. This slide shows you a summary of the pathway of the third, fourth, and sixth cranial nerves which supply the extraocular muscles. You can see first the oculomotor nerve. It emerges from the ventral aspect of the midbrain and it enters, as I said before, enters the cavernous sinus through its roof and lies on the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus. Divides into superior and inferior divisions and then enter the orbit through the superior orbital fissure. Trochlear nerve uh, emerges from the dorsal aspect of the midbrain and it travels in the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus together with the oculomotor nerve and enters the orbit through the superior orbital fissure. The abducent nerve emerges between the pons and the pyramid of the medulla, as I showed you in the previous slide. And unlike the other two nerves, the abducent nerve travels within the cavernous sinus. And it also enters the orbit through the superior orbital fissure. You can see some of these structures. Now this is oculomotor nerve, number 1, oculomotor nerve, and this is trochlear nerve. You can read the legends here with the numbers. Lying in the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus here, and this number 3 here, number 3 is the abducent nerve lying within the cavernous sinus together with the internal carotid artery and the sympathetic nerves surrounding it. Then other than that, you can see other two nerves here, number 4 and number 5, the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve and the maxillary division of the trigeminal nerve lying below the third and fourth cranial nerves in the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus. Fifth cranial nerve or the trigeminal nerve. It has got two functional components, the branchial motor component and the general somatic sensory component. The nerve emerges from the ventral aspect of the brain and the general somatic sensory component and the branchial motor component emerge separately from the ventral aspect of the pons as sensory root and the motor root. This is the branchial motor component, and these are the three parts of the general somatic sensory component. We will look at the trigeminal nerve in little bit more detail. You can see the general somatic sensory nucleus here. I have shortened it to make the diagram easy to understand. And this is the branchial motor nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. Now you already know the trigeminal nerve has three divisions: the ophthalmic division, the maxillary division, and the mandibular division. Now if you look at the arrangement of nerve, the functional components here, you can see the general somatic sensory component is found in all three divisions of the trigeminal nerve: the ophthalmic division, maxillary division, and the mandibular division. But the branchial motor component is only found in the mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve. This is the reason we call mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve as the first branchial arch nerve, not the other two. And for the same reason, the mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve becomes a mixed nerve because it has both sensory and motor components. Then the other point is, you have already seen that the ophthalmic division and the maxillary division, they lie in the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus together with the optic and trochlear nerves. We have talked about the sensory nerves before, and we have said the general rule of sensory nerves is to have the cell body of the first order neuron outside the central nervous system in a ganglion. Therefore, the first order neuron cell bodies of the sensory nerves coming through any of these divisions will lie in the trigeminal ganglion in the middle cranial fossa. and the sensory, the general somatic sensory nucleus lying in the pons is actually the cell bodies of the second order neuron in the sensory pathway. And the motor component, branchial motor component carried through the mandibular division will supply the muscles of mastication. You can name the muscles of mastication. It's a list of muscles. You have the temporalis muscle, you have the medial and lateral pterygoid muscles, then the masseter muscle, and then other muscles like anterior bellies of digastric and the mylohyoid muscles.